In the wizarding world, spells can be cast in many different ways. With wands, without wands, verbally, non-verbally. We also know that things like wand loyalty can affect how well a witch or wizard is able to channel his or her magic. And depending on which combination of these things a wizard uses, non-verbal with a wand, verbal without a wand, verbal with a wand, etc., I imagine that we're going to see some pretty varied results. So my question today is, does speaking the spell out loud actually make it stronger? And while we're at it, I'll also be diving into whether magic performed with a wand is inherently more powerful than wandless casting. Let's dive into it. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. To kick things off, let's establish the standard orientation for how a wizard performs a spell. Typically, Hogwarts students and young witches and wizards in general are first introduced to magic through the use of a wand and verbal incantations. This is the most common and widely accepted method of spellcasting, especially for beginners. Why? Because it offers structure. The wand acts as a magical conduit, focusing and amplifying the caster's innate magical ability. And the verbal component, the spoken incantation, helps channel intent with greater precision. For an inexperienced wizard, these tools work like training wheels, making magic more accessible and less likely to misfire. Therefore, in the wizarding world, it's customary for children to visit Ollivanders to receive their very first wand. This moment marks the beginning of their magical education, and from that point forward, the wand becomes a crucial tool for helping them channel, focus, and control their innate magical energy. With their wand in hand, they begin learning how to cast spells, which typically involves saying both the correct incantation and performing the appropriate wand movement. At this stage, both components, the words and the motion, are essential for most spells. And depending on the spell, even slight changes in pronunciation or wand technique can lead to dramatically different results. We needn't look too far into the books or films to find examples of this. And really, when you think about it, it's hard to imagine the wizarding world without wands. They're at the center of so many iconic scenes. From Harry's first visit to Ollivanders, to Hermione correcting Ron on how to pronounce Wingardium Leviosa, to Voldemort's obsession with the Elder Wand and the fated twin core connection between Harry and the Dark Lord, wands are more than just tools. They're deeply tied to the identity and destiny of every witch and wizard. Anyway, these are the foundations of performing magic. But like with many things, there are levels to this, and not all ways of performing magic follow the same rules. As witches and wizards become more skilled, some of them begin to move beyond these basics, experimenting with non-verbal casting or even casting without a wand entirely. We've seen countless examples of this from the likes of Dumbledore, Voldemort, Moody, Flitwick, and many more. But how and why do they do it? What's interesting about wandless magic is that it only really stands out to us because of the ubiquity of wand use in the wizarding world we've become familiar with. Through the books and films, we are indoctrinated from the start to think that a wand is essential to magical achievement. But in truth, wandless magic is actually a norm for other species and cultures. Magical beings like goblins and elves only perform wandless magic, and are even known to refer to humans as wand bearers. Expanding on this, in the world of Harry Potter, the wand is said to be a European invention, which means that cultures outside of Europe would have always practiced magic without one. Take the African magical school Wagadu, for example, where students are exclusively taught wandless magic, and wands have only circulated the region for the last 100 years or so. And outside of these cultures, species, the use of wandless magic in a world where the use of a wand is so ubiquitous can likely be attributed to one of two things. A. Powerful magical ability, vast experience, and calculated casting, and B. Lack of experience and accidental casting. Underage witches and wizards who have yet to receive their first wand have been known to cast this type of magic. Most often, the reason for this is that the children had a lack of control over their abilities, thus unintentionally casting a spell. Experienced witches and wizards, however, most likely cast wandless magic out of convenience. Wizards like Dumbledore or Voldemort, so powerful and competent in their ability to cast spells that they really see no use for a wand in most everyday circumstances. So that about sums up the with versus without wand analysis. But what about verbal versus non-verbal spellcasting? We've already established that most young witches and wizards start off casting spells verbally, often paired with a very specific wand movement. This creates a kind of formula. Say the words, move the wand in just the right way, and voila, magic. But as witches and wizards grow in confidence and control, some begin to experiment with dropping the verbal components altogether. They learn to cast non-verbal spells, a more advanced and mentally demanding form of magic that relies heavily on intention and focus rather than spoken words. Non-verbal casting is introduced to Hogwarts students in their 6th year, specifically in Defense Against the Dark Arts, Charms, and Transfiguration classes, and it's made very clear that it isn't easy. Even gifted students struggle with it, and in many cases, attempting to cast spells silently can result in weaker or failed magic if the caster isn't experienced enough. So it's more difficult, but does that mean it's more powerful or just more convenient, like wandless magic? There are a few ways of looking at this. The most straightforward explanation would be that speaking a spell helps channel magic more efficiently, the same way that the use of a wand helps channel the magic. Saying the incantation aloud gives the caster's intent a kind of structure, like a framework for the magic to follow. For inexperienced witches and wizards, this guidance can be the difference between a well-formed spell and a complete misfire. Through this way of thinking, it's not necessarily that the sound makes the spell stronger, but that it helps focus and sharpen the caster's intent, which leads to more consistent results. Another way to look at it is that non-verbal magic isn't inherently weaker, it's just much harder. The problem is that most wizards don't have the discipline or magical focus to pull it off effectively. It requires intense concentration and a deep understanding of the magic being used. J.K. Rowling herself has confirmed that non-verbal magic demands a stronger sense of purpose and will, meaning the barrier isn't power, it's precision. So while verbal spells might feel stronger for the average wizard, a skilled caster can perform non-verbal magic with equal or possibly even greater effect, depending on the context. There's also the possibility that spoken words themselves carry magical resonance. In this view, the incantation isn't just a placeholder for intent, but actually a way of adding additional magical energy to the spell through sound. This could explain why Latin-based incantations have remained relatively unchanged for centuries, passed down from wizard to wizard with exact pronunciation. If the spoken word does contribute to the magical output, then verbal casting could genuinely amplify a spell's strength, not just in clarity, but in raw power. This idea leans into the idea that language and vibration are fundamental to magical expression. Another way to look at it is that the difference depends on the spell itself. While certain types of spells might require spoken incantations to access their full potential, others, like quickfire jinxes or charms, may be better suited for non-verbal casting. And finally, it's possible that innate magical ability is the real deciding factor here, not whether or not the spell is spoken. In this sense, non-verbal spellcasting is harder to master not because it's weaker, but because it demands a higher level of magical discipline and internal control. In other words, a powerful wizard like Dumbledore might be able to produce a stronger result non-verbally than an average wizard could verbally, because his command over magic is that refined. By this way of thinking, non-verbal magic, performed properly, may unlock an entirely different tier of magical capability, one that reflects a deeper resonance with magic itself, a form of advanced, internalized spellwork that is more instinctual, fluid, and directly tied to the caster's inner power. Only the most talented or intuitive witches and wizards would be able to perform it at this level, suggesting that non-verbal casting isn't just a silent version of standard spellwork, but a more refined and personal form of magic. And those who reach this level, like Dumbledore or Voldemort, aren't just skipping incantations for flair. They're operating on a wavelength of magic that very few ever reach, which might explain why we so rarely see witches and wizards uttering the incantations during duels. As things stand, there are 4 combinations for how spells can be cast. The most common and reliable method is verbal with a wand, the standard taught at Hogwarts. This is effective and ideal for both beginners and experienced casters. Next up, we've got non-verbal with a wand, where the wand still provides structure and power, but the caster must rely entirely on internal focus and willpower to direct the magic. It's harder to master, but when done correctly and by the right person, I would argue that it could be more powerful. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got verbal without a wand. In a previous video, I discussed why I believed magic produced with a wand to be a more viable method of producing powerful spells. And while speaking the spell out loud may help guide intent, the absence of a wand limits amplification and control. Finally, the most difficult and rarest form is non-verbal without a wand. This method relies purely on raw magical ability, and is usually only seen in magical creatures like house elves, or in instances of accidental magic. For a human to cast deliberate and powerful spells this way would require exceptional innate talent and extreme control, putting it far beyond the reach of most witches and wizards. Anyway, that's it for today's video. What do you think? Is a spell more powerful if you say it out loud? Let me know down in the comment section below. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.